Hello, my name is Megan Burdine, and I'm a junior in the Honors Scholars Program. For this SURF presentation, I'm going to be presenting on my capstone literary analysis of the works of two philosophers, Praise of Folly by Erasmus and The Apology of Socrates by Plato. Specifically, I will be analyzing how these philosophers explore the question of what is the nature and purpose of wisdom. Before I start, I want to say that since I have submitted my abstract, I have done a bit more analysis that has allowed me to strengthen my thesis, so I want to apologize for the little bit of discrepancy between my presentation and the abstract. Here's my title. So first, let me give a bit of an introduction on the main points that I will be covering. So I chose these two texts and philosophers because I saw a really strong similarity between them, despite them coming from two vastly different time periods and perspectives. And I saw this similarity, especially in the definitions that they have of wisdom and in how they quantify its importance in human life. They both make the argument that wisdom is when you understand where your limits in your own intelligence or knowledge are. This is reflected differently in each text, however. So in Praise of Folly, Erasmus, through the personification of folly, as well as through quite a bit of irony, shows how things that we might conventionally consider to be foolishness are actually wisdom. And then in the Apology of Socrates, Socrates argues that human wisdom is when you do not claim to know more than you do know. They also both make the distinction between human wisdom and divine wisdom, saying that human wisdom is not equivalent to divine wisdom and that it is also insufficient as an end in and of itself. And finally, although they both present a similar argument of the nature of wisdom as accepting one's limitations, while Socrates focuses on wisdom as a tool in the search for truth, Folly is more concerned with wisdom creating a fullness and a happiness on earth. So my first point that I explore is the one on which I think both authors agree the most, and that is on the nature of wisdom. As I've said, these authors agree that wisdom is when you are aware of and accepting of your own ignorance and limitations as a human being in general. Socrates says that this clearly when he recounts a time that he went to a politician, one who had a reputation for wisdom, but after speaking with him, Socrates concluded, and I quote, "I am wiser than this human being, for probably neither of us knows anything noble and good, but he supposes he knows something when he does not know, while I, just as I do not know, do not even suppose that I do." So he specifically notes that he does not know the greatest things, so he's acknowledging his limits as a human being. So by his own definition, Socrates is wise because he does not suppose to know more than he does know. In this quote that I have on the slide, Folly says, "Nothing is so foolish as mistimed wisdom, and nothing less sensible than misplaced sense. It is a true sign of prudence not to want wisdom which extends beyond your share as an ordinary mortal." So that's saying something really similar. Basically, Folly is making the argument that humans who strive their whole lives in order to be wise actually fail to have true wisdom because they have wasted their life away at trying to be wise when, as humans, we cannot have that kind of wisdom. This is where the ironic literary tool of praising folly or foolishness comes in for Erasmus. The foolish people, such as children and the elderly, are often those who are not stressed with things that do not really matter and are not fearful and are therefore more happy, according to Folly, as reflected in this quote. "The nearer people approach old age, the closer they return to a semblance of childhood until the time comes for them to depart this life, again like children, neither tired of living nor aware of death." So rather, she argues that it is better to know that you as a human being are foolish, and so you should live your life well, and that is where true wisdom is found. And then I'll get a little bit more into what Erasmus truly means by living life well in a later point. So for this next point I have here is the two philosophers' answers to the purpose of wisdom in human life. As Folly says, you are wise when you are foolish, that is, when you're not concerned with wisdom, because this allows you to act boldly, to gain experience and prudence, to have no fear, and to learn from your mistakes rather than live life with your nose stuck in a book, unable to achieve even a human kind of wisdom in the impossible attempt to gain something more. Socrates agrees with much of this, but he instead emphasizes the search for truth. He also says that to follow truth he also says that one should follow truth and have no fear, because fear prevents wisdom, which in turn hinders that search for truth. So Socrates believes that there is a single moral truth, and that the greatest thing impeding the achievement of this single moral truth is the opinions of individuals. Although he does not necessarily believe that humans can achieve that truth, he thinks that we should do our best to try. But this is one of the reasons that he is on trial in the Apology of Socrates. So the word apology simply means defense speech, and that is because in this text, Plato recounts Socrates' defense when he is put on trial in Athens on the charges of corrupting the youth and disbelieving in the Athenian gods. So Thomas G. West, in the introduction to this apology, discusses how Socrates' skepticism in Athenian laws and opinions or beliefs leads him to essentially create his own god, claiming that this god guides him with the voice of the daimonian. Essentially, here Socrates has created for himself his own Delphic oracle, and he also even redefines the standards of education and piety in order to make himself innocent of these charges of corrupting the youth and disbelieving in the Athenian gods. Interestingly, Erasmus kind of does something similar in Praise of Folly, because he wrote this in part to criticize certain practices of the Catholic Church, and particularly of some theologians at the time. So Erasmus wrote the text in the duration of a week while staying at Thomas More's house. And although the title is a pun on More's name, Morie Enconium, which is Praise of Folly, and it is written with a lot of irony, Erasmus's arguments are actually intentional and serious. So he followed the schools of Christian philosophy and Renaissance humanism, which is why he focuses his definition of wisdom and its purpose on how to live properly in the world and how to live properly as a Christian. Like Socrates, Erasmus believes that there is a clear moral truth, but he thinks that the current practices of the time actually counter wisdom and counter this truth. In the letter to Martin Dorp, Erasmus explains that he almost regretted writing Praise of Folly, but that he thought it was good because it provided the same arguments that he did in an earlier, more serious work called the Enchiridion on how to live a good Christian life. But he presents it in Praise of Folly in a way that might be more receptive to the readers because it is very entertaining to read. In this letter, he also says that very clearly states that everything that Folly says reflects his own true beliefs, that he took on the role of Folly as a character in a play. So everything that Folly says is actually an argument made by Erasmus. So moving back to the arguments the philosophers make, both agree that there is a distinction between divine wisdom and the wisdom that human beings can attain. So Folly says that nothing happens in this world which isn't full of folly performed by fools amongst fools. So since everyone is foolish, as she says in this quote, the argument here is that humans can only attain a human version of wisdom. Complete fools, for Folly, are those that are ashamed of it and who pretend to hide their foolishness. Similarly, Socrates says that he is wise in human wisdom, which again is knowing the limits of your own wisdom and to not claim to know more than you do. And he also says that it is not as good as divine wisdom. Neither philosopher really gives a strong definition for what divine wisdom is, but both do refer to their God. So for Erasmus, this is the Christian God, and for Socrates, it is the God that he's created for himself. Socrates says that it would be bad if he did not believe in the gods, as the Athenians have placed him on trial for, since that would be like supposing he is wise, wiser than the gods. But really, it seems that he only has one God that he believes in, which he made himself. So that argument is also an interesting one. Folly, on the other hand, notes that even Christ did not like those who put their trust in their own intelligence. So although their arguments are similar in the regard to using their God and the definition of how there is a divine wisdom more than a human wisdom, their difference in religious beliefs is likely one aspect which leads to their difference in what they believe wisdom can achieve. So unlike Socrates, Folly believes that wisdom can lead to happiness on earth. Folly says that Socrates was sensible in one point, that he refused to be called wise and instead attributed this wisdom to the god. But because of his philosophizing about useless things, gaining the knowledge which Folly has described as a kind of false wisdom, he, I quote, learned nothing about the affairs of ordinary life. Folly would say that Socrates still wasn't happy because he was concerned with wisdom. He still had that kind of arrogance, that desire to be wise. So he never truly achieved the wisdom that Folly defines. Folly says, happiness consists in being willing to be what you are, and Socrates says it profits me to be just as I am. Thus, Folly would see Socrates as very close to being wise, but that he just failed because he was still too caught up in his own wisdom. Socrates would likely argue that Erasmus did not go far enough in his argument, that the purpose of wisdom is to help one search for truth, but since Erasmus was a Christian, he argues that there are none more foolish and therefore none wiser and happier than the Christians, who suffer a lot, as he mentions, and believe in a God that suffered for them, or for all of humanity. So I would think that Erasmus would actually see God as that truth, searching for that. So I don't think these arguments actually are contradictory at all. So in conclusion, Plato and Erasmus, through Socrates and Folly, explore the questions of what the nature of wisdom is and what its role is in human life. While they agree on much, including the definition of wisdom as accepting your limitations, the impediment of fear in one's life, and finally the superiority of divine wisdom over human wisdom, they also have a lot to say to each other through the texts. Socrates argues that wisdom is important to help one find the one moral truth, and Folly believes that wisdom is necessary to live life well and to gain happiness. So these differences in their arguments are not necessarily opposed to each other. Perhaps together they would say that wisdom is necessary to live life according to one moral truth. So that is all I have. Thank you for listening, and have a nice day.